In this video, I'll be showing you how I made these leveling feet, as well as these caster feet for my modular shop cabinet system. All of these cabinets have this 4-bolt hole pattern in each of the 4 corners of the bottom for bolting on the feet, and it has a specific spacing and position for a reason. So obviously these feet raise the cabinet up to give it a good toe kick, but right at the corner they're in the way, and so you don't have a toe kick there. But by making this a square hole pattern, I can index the foot 90 degrees, and now I do have a toe kick. But I still don't have a toe kick from the side, so I can index it another 90 degrees, and now I have a toe kick from both directions. This arrangement maximizes my toe kick, but as you can imagine, it makes the cabinet quite a bit less stable. It's more likely to tip forward. So this specific hole pattern in the cabinets and the leveling feet allows you to index the leveling feet to any position to optimize for stability or to optimize for toe kick. The height of this wood riser part is the same as the height of the hole spacing in the side of the cabinet. So what that means is you can put these riser feet on one set of cabinets and then on an adjacent set of cabinets leave the riser foot off, and the vertical offset between those cabinets will be exactly one hole spacing, which means the holes will still line up between a cabinet that has the riser feet and a cabinet that doesn't. Also, the vertical spacing of these holes is a multiple of the drawer slide spacing, which means that the drawer slides will also line up if you have one cabinet with these and an adjacent one without. That's pretty much all I have to say about these leveling feet, so let's talk about these caster feet. These are not really indexable. I mean, you technically can index them to like this position, sort of sticking out awkwardly, and it's not really giving you any more toe kick because the caster is still there. So they're really only intended to go this way. These feet have a bit of a riser here that doesn't quite touch the ground. So it might seem like this is just decorative, but it's actually there to be able to put a wedge under like this. And that is very effective at immobilizing the cabinet. I could have made this a lot fancier with some sort of retractable foot or a retractable caster or something, and I might do that in the future because it might be more user-friendly, and also you wouldn't need to have a wedge sticking out in space like this. But this is extremely simple. This is extremely easy to make, and it's very effective. There's always the option to make more complicated ones in the future if I want to, because these are modular. I can just change them out. But I wanted to at least have this really simple option. And they do have one advantage, which is they're very effective on uneven floors, because if one of these feet is a little higher off the floor than the others, that just means you put the wedge in a little bit farther. So you never have any issues with it rocking. When you put the wedges in there, this cabinet's not going anywhere. I can like slam my entire body into it and it doesn't budge. It passes the Matthias test. Okay, it did move like a 1/4 inch there. Okay, I think it's time I show you how to build the leveling feet. I'm starting by cutting out 4 squares of 18mm Baltic birch plywood, and these are going to form the top of the feet. Now I'm marking out and drilling pilot holes where the holes for mounting the feet to the cabinets will go. I drill roughly halfway through with a 3/8 inch bit, then flip the piece upside down and drill 11mm deep with a 3/4 inch drill bit. This makes a nice concentric counterbore. To make the vertical parts of the feet, I start by cutting this 9mm piece of Baltic birch plywood to height, and then cut it at a 30-degree angle to make the 2 pieces. Before I assemble this, I want to put some roundovers on these edges because they'll be harder to access after assembly. So I'm marking where those roundovers should come to and then routing them. After applying glue to that first side, I use the second side to gauge how far over it needs to stick. I made the first side overhang the second side a little here, so that I can trim that off later and it will be perfectly flush. And here's trimming off that overhang. It's just easier to glue it up with a little overhang and then trim it off later, rather than trying to get it perfect during that initial glue up. Here I needed a 27mm square stick, so I'm gluing up several scraps to make that. Once that glue is dry, I can trim that to a perfect 27mm square, and then I cut one corner off at a 45-degree angle. I lost footage of that cut, but here's roughly how it went. I only need 4 of these little blocks right now, but I cut 8. You'll see me using the other 4 on the caster feet later in the video. At this point, all of the feet are a little too tall. I made them all a couple millimeters too tall. So here I've set up a stop block and I'm trimming them all to the actual final height. Off camera, I did a little sanding and put some more roundovers on it, making it all nice and finished, and I also applied some wipe-on poly. And here I'm marking where the hole is going to go for a coupling nut that will actually hold the leveling foot. I'll hold that coupling nut in place with some 5-minute epoxy. Recycling my squeeze out for the next one. The coupling nut is intended to be flush with the wood. It's sticking out here a little bit, and that's an accident, but it's fine. For the actual leveling feet, I'm just using elevator bolts because they're really cheap and easy to find locally. But of course you could use actual leveling feet if you want to. That's it for the leveling feet, so let's move on to making the caster feet. Just like for the leveling feet, I start by cutting out 4 squares. These are slightly larger than the squares for the leveling feet. Here I've configured my miter gauge with a stop block to be able to trim a repeatable amount off of the corners of all of these. And here I've reconfigured it with a different stop block to be able to take a bigger chunk off of the corner. Marking out the positions for the holes on all of those, except this time there are only 3 holes, since the 4th one would be under the caster and not accessible anyway. The sides, or legs, or risers, I'm not sure what to call these, they're the same as on the leveling feet. I'm just marking out a 30-degree angle on a piece that I cut slightly oversized, cutting those out on the bandsaw and then cutting them to length on the table saw, adding a roundover to any edge that might be difficult to access later. And the glue up process is also the same as before. I'm overhanging the first side by a few millimeters so that I have a bit to trim off later, and then gluing and nailing everything together. I want all of the feet for all of the cabinets to be the same height. So whether I'm using the leveling feet or the caster feet, all of my cabinets will end up the same height so that all of my work surfaces in the shop are the same height. Unfortunately, casters vary in height. So this one is not quite tall enough. So I'm going to cut a spacer to the exact size of this plate that's the right height to bring the overall foot up to the right height. Luckily in this case, the amount of spacer I need is exactly 12 millimeters, so I can just use some 12 mil plywood for this. checking to be sure that the caster clears the leg. And here's where I use the other 4 of those little blocks I cut earlier. I also oversized these just so I don't have to be as precise while gluing them up. So here I'm cutting them to final height. After applying a coat of wipe-on poly, I pre-drilled holes for the screws that will hold the casters on and then screwed them on. Making sure that the wheel still clears the leg. And with that, the caster feet are done. These feet get mounted to the cabinets in the same way that the cabinets get mounted to each other, using a 1/4 by 1 or an M6 by 25 millimeter bolt, a couple of hardened washers, and a lock nut. I put together some simple plans for these, so if you want to build them yourself, there's a link in the description to where you can get these plans on my website. There are some one-to-one templates and some really simple instructions on how to assemble it. Well, I think that's it for this one, so I hope you enjoyed that, and thank you for watching.